The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of San Miguel, Texas, as Isabella Morales stood at her bedroom window, watching the town wake up below. Her fingers traced patterns on the glass. Circles, lines, shapes that meant nothing to anyone else but carried entire conversations in the language she had created for herself over 15 years of silence. At 22, Bella had learned that the absence of voice could be more powerful than any scream. She had learned this lesson on a night when she was 7 years old, crouched in a root cellar while her family died above her, their cries cutting through the darkness until they were replaced by a silence that had never left her throat. "Bella, breakfast," called Nathaniel Cross from downstairs, his voice carrying the warm authority of a man who had been father, protector, and provider for more years than most people remembered. To the town of San Miguel, Nathaniel Cross was a pillar of the community, a successful rancher who had taken in an orphaned Mexican girl and raised her as his own daughter despite the whispers and social barriers of 1887 Texas. What they didn't know was that Nathaniel Cross was the monster who had created that orphan. Bella pressed her palm against the cool glass, feeling the morning vibrations travel up from the street. Mrs. Chen was opening her laundry shop, the hinges on her door singing their familiar squeak. Old Pete was leading his mule toward the well, the animal's hooves creating a rhythm Bella had memorized over countless mornings. And somewhere in that symphony of daily life, she could detect the subtle signs that today would be different. A horse she didn't recognize, footsteps with a purposeful stride, the kind of energy that meant a stranger had come to San Miguel, and in her experience, strangers brought either salvation or destruction. Given that she had been waiting 15 years for salvation and had seen nothing but variations of destruction, Bella wasn't optimistic. She dressed in the simple brown dress Cross preferred for her. Modest, unremarkable, the kind of clothing that helped a person disappear into the background. Over the years, invisibility had become her greatest skill and her most essential survival tool. Cross saw her as his damaged, silent ward who cleaned his house and cooked his meals with the grateful obedience of someone who knew she owed her life to his charity. He had no idea that every night for the past 5 years, Isabella Morales had been anything but invisible. Bella made her way downstairs to the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the wooden steps. Cross sat at the head of the long dining table, reading a letter with the kind of focused attention that usually meant business. And Cross's business was rarely good news for the Mexican and Apache families spotted throughout the territory. "We're having a guest for dinner tonight," he said, without looking up from his correspondence. "A lawyer from Austin, Thomas Rivera, says he's researching some old property disputes for a client back east." Bella nodded and began preparing breakfast, but her mind was racing. Rivera. The name meant something, stirred memories that had been buried so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. Where had she heard that name before? As she cracked eggs into the cast-iron skillet, fragments of a long-buried memory began to surface. The woman's voice, speaking Spanish in urgent whispers, a child crying in the darkness, hands, gentle female hands, pulling her from the root cellar and carrying her away from the burning remains of her family's ranch. "Shisha mi niña, I am Maria Rivera. I will keep you safe until—" The memory dissolved before she could grasp it fully, but the name remained. Rivera, Maria Rivera. The woman who had found her that night, who had carried her through the darkness toward what should have been safety, until Cross had appeared like an angel of mercy to claim the traumatized child and promise her a home. Bella had been so grateful then, so relieved to have someone strong and capable take responsibility for her shattered world. It had taken her years to understand that angels and devils often wore the same face. "You remember your manners around our guest," Cross continued, still reading his letter. "No staring, no strange behavior. Mr. Rivera is an educated man, and I want him to see that I've raised you properly despite your limitations." Bella nodded again, playing the role she had perfected over 15 years. The damaged girl who couldn't speak, wouldn't speak, had perhaps forgotten how to speak. It was a performance so complete that sometimes even she forgot where it ended and her real self began. But late at night, when Cross slept and the town lay quiet under the Texas stars, Isabella Morales remembered exactly who she was and what she was capable of. She finished cooking breakfast and served it to Cross with the same routine they had followed for years. As he ate, she mentally reviewed the network she had built in secret, the system of communication and assistance that had helped dozens of families escape Cross's various schemes over the past 5 years. There was Elena Vasquez, the young woman who worked as a nurse and midwife throughout the territory. Elena believed she was helping La Silenciosa, the silent guardian who left medicine and money for families in need. She had no idea that La Silenciosa was the quiet Mexican girl who served Cross his meals and cleaned his house. There was Father Miguel Santos, the elderly priest who heard confessions in 3 languages and kept secrets that could topple governments. Miguel knew more than he let on, but his knowledge came wrapped in the sacred seal of confession and the careful diplomacy of a man who had survived decades in a territory where the wrong word could mean death. And scattered throughout the backcountry were families, Mexican shepherds, Apache scouts, Chinese railroad workers, who formed a network of eyes and ears that kept watch over Cross's activities and provided early warning when his attention turned toward new victims. Cross had created this network himself, though he didn't know it. Every family he had destroyed, every life he had shattered, every community he had displaced, had left behind survivors who understood that their continued existence depended on knowing what he planned next. Bella had simply learned to speak their language of survival. "I'll be in town most of the day," Cross said, finishing his breakfast, meeting with the sheriff and some of the territorial officials about expanding the railroad spur. "Make sure the house is presentable for tonight." Bella watched him prepare to leave, noting the way he checked his gun, the careful arrangement of papers in his saddlebags, the subtle tells that indicated he was planning something more significant than a simple business meeting. After 15 years of reading his moods and movements, she could predict his actions with disturbing accuracy. Today, someone was going to suffer for whatever was in that letter from Austin. As soon as Cross's horse disappeared over the ridge, Bella transformed from silent servant into something else entirely. She moved through the house with purpose, gathering the tools she had hidden over years of patient preparation. A small telescope that let her observe activities miles away, maps she had drawn of every ranch, mine, and settlement in the territory, and most importantly, a collection of journals written in a code that combined Spanish, Apache symbols, and mathematical notations her father had taught her before his death. Eduardo Morales had been more than a simple rancher. He had been an engineer, educated in Mexico City before the revolution drove him north to Texas. He had taught his daughter to think in systems, to understand how individual parts connected to create larger patterns, to see the hidden structures that controlled everything from water flow to human behavior. Those lessons had kept her alive and sane through 15 years of living with her family's killer. Bella climbed to the attic where Cross never ventured, her private sanctuary hidden behind false walls and carefully arranged cobwebs. Here, surrounded by her father's engineering drawings and her mother's religious icons, she had built the command center for a resistance network that Cross couldn't imagine. She opened her latest journal and began documenting the morning's intelligence. Cross was meeting with territorial officials about railroad expansion, which meant new land would be seized through legal manipulation. The families currently living on that land would be offered prices far below market value, and those who refused to sell would face mysterious accidents or trumped-up criminal charges. It was a pattern Bella had observed dozens of times over the years. Cross had refined the process into an art form that left him wealthy and his victims either dead or displaced, with no legal recourse and no way to prove his involvement. But today might be different. Today, a lawyer named Thomas Rivera was coming to investigate old property disputes, and Rivera was not a name Cross would have welcomed into his home unless he had no choice in the matter. Bella pulled out her father's surveying equipment and climbed to the roof where she could observe the town through the telescope without being seen. Cross was already at the sheriff's office, his horse tied outside alongside several others she didn't recognize. Official horses from the look of them, with the kind of tack that suggested government business. Through the telescope's lens, she could see Cross gesturing animatedly to a group of men in suits. His body language suggested persuasion mixed with veiled threats, the kind of performance he gave when circumstances required him to negotiate rather than simply intimidate. Someone was putting pressure on Cross, and that someone might be connected to Thomas Rivera. Bella lowered the telescope and returned to her attic sanctuary, where she pulled out the most carefully guarded secret in her collection, her father's real journal, written in the months before his death. Eduardo Morales had discovered something that made Cross willing to commit mass murder to possess it, and that something was still hidden somewhere on the land Cross now owned. But Eduardo had been too smart to put all his secrets in one place. The journal contained references to the deeper truth and the gift for Isabella that could only be found by someone who understood both his engineering notations and the Apache symbols he had learned from their neighbors. For 15 years, Bella had been decoding her father's final message, piece by piece, symbol by symbol. She was close now, so close she could almost taste the resolution that had driven her through years of silent endurance. The sound of approaching horses brought her back to the present. Through the attic window, she could see a lone rider coming up the road toward Cross's house. Even from a distance, she could tell this was Thomas Rivera, young, well-dressed, riding with the confidence of someone who belonged in civilized society rather than the raw territory of South Texas. Bella watched him dismount and approach the front door, noting the way he moved with careful purpose. This was not a man on a casual research mission. This was someone with a specific agenda, and his arrival in San Miguel was no coincidence. She climbed down from the attic and returned to her role as Cross's silent ward, preparing the house for their evening guest while her mind raced through possibilities and plans. Thomas Rivera was either a threat to Cross or an opportunity for justice, and Bella intended to discover which before the night was over. By sunset, the house was immaculate. Bella had prepared Cross's favorite meal, beef roasted with herbs, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden she tended behind the house. Everything designed to present the image of domestic harmony that Cross used to deflect suspicion from his darker activities. She was setting the table when Cross returned, his mood notably different from the morning. Where he had been confident and controlled at breakfast, now he carried the tension of a man facing unexpected complications. "Rivera will be here within the hour," he told her, his voice carrying undertones of warning. "I want you to serve dinner and then make yourself scarce. This is business that doesn't concern you." But of course, everything Cross did concerned her. Every deal he made, every life he destroyed, every crime he committed added another layer to the prison of complicity she had been forced to inhabit. She was not just his victim, she was his unwitting accomplice, the orphan whose tragic story provided cover for the man who had created her tragedy. Bella nodded obediently and continued her preparations, but her mind was already working on how to observe the conversation without being detected. Over the years, she had discovered that the house's heating system carried sound from the dining room to the kitchen in ways that Cross didn't realize, and she had learned to position herself where she could hear everything while appearing to busy herself with cleaning. As darkness settled over the ranch, the sound of hoofbeats announced Rivera's arrival. Bella watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted, noting details that might prove important later. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28, with the kind of refined features that suggested education and privilege. But there was something in his bearing that spoke of deeper currents, a tension that suggested personal investment rather than professional obligation. Cross greeted Rivera at the door with practiced warmth, but Bella could see the calculation behind his hospitality. He was assessing his guest, looking for weaknesses to exploit or threats to neutralize. "Mr. Rivera, welcome to my home. I trust your journey from Austin wasn't too difficult." "Not at all, Mr. Cross. Thank you for agreeing to see me on such short notice." Rivera's voice carried the educated cadences of someone comfortable in courtrooms and boardrooms, but underneath the polish Bella detected something familiar. An accent, perhaps, or an inflection that reminded her of voices from her childhood. They moved to the dining room, where Bella served dinner with the invisible efficiency Cross expected. As she poured wine and arranged plates, she studied Rivera more closely, searching for the source of that familiar quality in his voice. When he thanked her in Spanish, "Gracias, señorita," she nearly dropped the serving dish. The voice was different, deeper and aged by years, but the rhythm and intonation were unmistakable. She had heard this voice before, speaking urgent words in a woman's cadence. "I am Maria Rivera. I will keep you safe until. Thomas Rivera was the son of the woman who had pulled her from the root cellar 15 years ago. Bella managed to finish serving without betraying her shock, but her mind was reeling with implications. If Thomas was Maria Rivera's son, then his presence here was not about property disputes or legal research. He was here because of that night, because of what had happened to her family, because of secrets that had been buried for 15 years. She retreated to the kitchen and positioned herself where she could hear the conversation while appearing to clean dishes. Cross and Rivera were making small talk about Austin, about the territorial government, about the challenges of practicing law on the frontier. But underneath the pleasantries, both men were maneuvering towards something more significant. Your letter mentioned old property disputes, Cross said eventually. Specifically, you mentioned the Morales Ranch. That's ancient history now. 15 years since that tragedy occurred. Yes, I'm aware of the timeline, Rivera replied carefully. But my client has reason to believe there were irregularities in how the estate was settled, questions about whether all legitimate heirs were properly identified and compensated. Bella's hands stilled in the dishwater. Heirs. Rivera was talking about heirs to her father's estate. I'm not sure what irregularities you're referring to, Cross said, his voice taking on the edge that appeared whenever someone questioned his version of events. The territorial government investigated thoroughly at the time. Bandits killed the entire family, Eduardo, his wife Carmen, their 2 children. I found the girl's body myself, poor thing, buried her alongside her family in the Catholic cemetery. Rivera was quiet for a moment, and Bella could imagine him processing this information, comparing it to whatever evidence had brought him to San Miguel. The girl, he said finally, Isabella Morales. You're certain she died that night? Saw her body with my own eyes, Cross replied with the conviction of a man who had told the same lie so many times it had become truth in his own mind. 7 years old, poor child. The trauma was too much for someone so young. Bella felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Cross wasn't just denying her survival. He was describing her death with the kind of specific detail that came from having planned it. The only reason she was alive was because Maria Rivera had found her first, before Cross could complete what he had started. I see, Rivera said, his voice carefully neutral. And you took it upon yourself to ensure she received proper burial? Someone had to. The territorial authorities weren't much concerned with dead Mexicans, if I'm being honest. I felt it was my Christian duty. The conversation continued, but Bella was no longer fully listening. Her mind was racing through the implications of what she had just heard. Cross had planned to kill her that night, would have killed her if not for Maria Rivera's intervention, which meant that everything that had followed, his rescue of her, his charity in raising her, his paternal protection, was built on the foundation of an incomplete murder. She was not his ward or his adopted daughter. She was his unfinished business. The sound of chairs scraping against wood brought her back to the present. The men were moving to Cross's study, where he kept his most important papers and his most expensive whiskey. Bella knew that room well. She cleaned it regularly and had memorized the location of every document, every hidden compartment, every secret Cross thought he was keeping. She also knew that the study's fireplace shared a chimney with the kitchen, and that careful positioning near the hearth allowed her to hear conversations conducted in the room above. I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Cross, Rivera was saying as they settled into leather chairs. But I should be direct about why I'm really here. Please do. My mother is Maria Rivera. She was present that night 15 years ago. The silence that followed this revelation stretched so long that Bella began to worry something had happened. Then Cross's voice returned, but it carried a different quality now. The careful flatness of a man realizing he was in serious danger. Maria Rivera, I remember her. Midwife, wasn't she? Helped with births throughout the territory. Among other things, yes. She also helped with deaths when necessary. She was there that night because Carmen Morales was having complications with a pregnancy. She arrived to find the ranch burning and the family dead. Tragic night, Cross said. I'm sorry your mother had to witness such violence. She witnessed more than violence, Mr. Cross. She witnessed survival. Another long silence. Bella pressed closer to the fireplace, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid it might give her away. "I'm not sure what you mean," Cross said finally. "Isabella Morales didn't die that night. My mother found her alive, hiding in the root cellar. She pulled her out, treated her injuries, and brought her to safety." Bella heard the soft sound of liquid being poured, Cross buying time to think while Rivera revealed information that could destroy everything Cross had built over the past 15 years. That's impossible," Cross said. "I found the child's body myself, buried her in consecrated ground. You buried someone, certainly, but it wasn't Isabella Morales." Rivera's voice carried absolute certainty, the confidence of someone presenting evidence rather than theories. Bella realized that Maria Rivera had not just saved her life that night, she had documented it, preserved proof of Cross's crimes, and spent 15 years preparing for this moment. "What do you want?" Cross asked, abandoning his pretense of confusion. "I want to know where she is. I want to know what happened to the little girl my mother saved. Even if such a child existed, even if your mother's memories are accurate after 15 years, what makes you think I would know anything about her whereabouts?" Rivera's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Because 3 days after the massacre, Nathaniel Cross appeared at my mother's house with a territorial marshal and a court order giving him custody of an unnamed Mexican orphan girl. A girl who matched Isabella Morales's exact description, but who had mysteriously lost her ability to speak. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel." Bella pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making any sound that might betray her presence, even as her world reorganized itself around this new understanding of her own history. Cross had not rescued her from trauma. He had claimed her as a trophy, a living reminder of his power to destroy entire families and then benefit from their destruction. She was not his act of charity. She was his insurance policy, a witness to his crimes who could never testify against him because she had been rendered voiceless by the shock of what she had seen. "You're making very serious accusations," Cross said, his voice dropping to the register that usually preceded violence. "I'm presenting facts. Isabella Morales survived the massacre of her family. She was taken into custody by you under circumstances that suggest coercion rather than rescue. And she has been living in your house for 15 years under conditions that constitute imprisonment. Even if any of this were true, which I categorically deny, what exactly do you propose to do about it?" Rivera's answer was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "I propose to find her, Mr. Cross. And I propose to give her the choice of speaking for herself, assuming she still can." The conversation ended abruptly after that, with Cross providing directions to the local hotel and promising to consider Rivera's requests. But Bella could hear in his voice the same tone that preceded his most violent solutions to inconvenient problems. Thomas Rivera had come to San Miguel to find her and give her a voice. By doing so, he had signed his own death warrant. Bella remained hidden in the kitchen long after both men had retired, her mind working through possibilities and plans. Rivera's presence changed everything, but it also created dangers she wasn't sure how to navigate. If Cross discovered that she could speak, if he realized she had been listening to his conversations and documenting his crimes for years, he would kill her immediately. But if she remained silent, Rivera would die for trying to help her, and the chance for justice would disappear with him. For the first time in 15 years, Isabella Morales faced a choice that could not be delayed, disguised, or avoided through patient endurance. She could continue being the silent victim of Cross's crimes, or she could risk everything to become the witness who could finally bring him to justice. As midnight approached, Bella made her way to the attic one more time, where she opened her father's journal and read the passage that had sustained her through the darkest moments of the past 15 years. "Mi querida Isabella, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are alone. But remember that alone does not mean powerless. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from silence, from watching, from waiting for exactly the right moment to speak the words that will change everything. When that moment comes, you will know. Trust yourself, trust your voice, and trust that justice delayed is not justice denied, it is justice prepared. Tomorrow, Thomas Rivera would begin his investigation, Cross would begin planning Rivera's elimination, and Isabella Morales would finally have to decide whether 15 years of silence had been preparation for surrender or for war. She closed the journal and looked out the attic window at the stars skittered across the Texas sky. Somewhere out there, Maria Rivera was waiting for news about the daughter she had saved 15 years ago. Father Miguel was keeping secrets that could reshape the territory's entire power structure, and Elena Vázquez was tending to families who trusted La Silenciosa to protect them from whatever darkness came next. Tomorrow, Isabella Morales would have to choose which version of herself would face the light of day. The silent victim who had survived by disappearing, or the avenging daughter who had spent 15 years learning to weaponize the very silence that was meant to destroy her. As she prepared for what might be her last night of invisibility, Bella touched her throat where her voice had been sleeping for 15 years, waiting for the moment when silence would become more dangerous than speech. That moment was coming, and when it arrived, the entire territory would hear her speak. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, but Isabella Morales had been awake for hours, her body rigid with tension as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the house around her. Cross's snoring had stopped an hour ago, replaced by the careful movements of a man who couldn't sleep because he was planning violence. Through her thin bedroom wall, she could hear him pacing, the floorboards creaking under his weight as he walked the same path he always traveled when working through the details of elimination. 3 steps to the window. Turn. 5 steps to the gun cabinet. Turn. 2 steps to the desk where he kept his most trusted contacts' information. Bella had memorized this routine over the years, had learned to read Cross's intentions through the rhythm of his restless nights. Tonight's pattern told her that Thomas Rivera had perhaps 6 hours before Cross's network moved to silence him permanently. She slipped from her bed and dressed in the dark, her movements practiced and silent. Today would require all the skills she had developed over 15 years of invisible survival, but it would also demand something she had never attempted: active intervention in Cross's plans before violence occurred rather than cleaning up the aftermath. The house settled into its familiar morning sounds as Cross finally stopped pacing and began his daily preparation ritual. Bella made her way to the kitchen where she started breakfast while mentally reviewing everything she had overheard the night before. Rivera wasn't just investigating property disputes. He was building a case that could expose Cross's entire network of corruption and violence, which meant Cross couldn't simply make Rivera disappear the way he had eliminated previous threats. The lawyer from Austin with documented research and official backing would be missed, investigated, avenged. Cross needed Rivera's death to look like an accident or the work of someone else entirely. "Morning, Bella," Cross said as he entered the kitchen, his voice carrying its usual paternal warmth. To anyone watching, he would appear to be a caring guardian greeting his ward with genuine affection. But Bella could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he studied her face for any sign that she had heard more than she should have. She nodded and served his breakfast, playing her role with the perfection of long practice, but inside her mind was racing through the network of communication she had built over the past 5 years. If she was going to save Rivera's life, she needed to activate resources Cross didn't know existed. "I'll be riding out early today," Cross continued, cutting his eggs with mechanical precision. "Business with the territorial marshal about some rustling problems. Might not be back until after dark." Bella nodded again, but she recognized the lie. Cross wasn't meeting with the marshal about rustling. He was meeting with his network of corrupt officials to arrange Rivera's elimination in a way that would remove the threat while maintaining his own plausible deniability. As soon as Cross left the house, Bella transformed from silent servant to active resistance leader. She retrieved her signaling equipment from its hiding place and climbed to the roof, where she could communicate with the Apache scouts who watched the territory from hidden positions in the surrounding hills. Using a series of mirror flashes that would look like random sunlight reflections to anyone who didn't understand the code, Bella sent a message that would ripple through her network within hours. "Lawyer in town. Cross-planning elimination. Protection needed. La Silenciosa." The response came quickly. 3 flashes from the ridge to the north, 2 from the canyon to the east. Her message had been received and was being relayed to every family, every ally, every person who had reason to fear Cross's reach. But signaling for protection wasn't enough. Rivera needed more than just anonymous guardians. He needed information that could keep him alive long enough to complete his investigation. And that information could only come from someone who had been inside Cross's operation for 15 years. Bella climbed down from the roof and made her way to the place she had avoided thinking about for months, the necessity of revealing herself to Rivera before Cross could silence them both. The ride into San Miguel took 40 minutes on Cross's spare horse, a gentle mare that Bella had befriended during the countless hours she spent caring for Cross's animals. To anyone who noticed her, she would appear to be running an errand for her guardian, the silent Mexican girl who occasionally appeared in town to purchase supplies or deliver messages. She tied the mare outside the hotel where Rivera was staying and studied the building carefully. Cross's network included the sheriff and several prominent businessmen, which meant Rivera was being watched even if he didn't realize it. Any open approach would be reported back to Cross within hours, but Bella had learned to navigate San Miguel's back alleys and hidden passages during 5 years of secret activities. She knew which buildings had unlocked back doors, which windows could be opened from the outside, and which rooms could be accessed without passing through the main lobby. Rivera was staying in room 3, according to the register she had glimpsed through the hotel's front window. The room faced the back alley, and its window was positioned just low enough for someone of Bella's small stature to reach from the ground. She made her way to the alley and studied the window carefully. The curtains were drawn, but she could see the shadow of someone moving inside. Rivera was awake, probably reviewing his research or preparing for whatever meetings he had planned for the day. Bella picked up a small stone and tapped it gently against the glass. 3 short taps, pause, 3 more taps. It was a pattern that would sound like random noise to anyone not expecting it, but distinctive enough to get Rivera's attention if he was alert. The shadow inside the room paused. After a moment, the curtain shifted slightly and Rivera's face appeared at the window. His eyes widened when he saw her, but to his credit, he didn't make any sudden movements or sounds that might alert anyone watching. Instead, he carefully opened the window and leaned out, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're her, aren't you? Isabella Morales?" For 15 years, Bella had been preparing for this moment, the moment when someone would speak her real name and wait for her to respond. For 15 years, she had imagined how it would feel to acknowledge her identity, to step out of the shadow of silence and claim the voice that Cross had tried to steal from her. The word that came from her throat was rusty, barely audible after so many years of disuse, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured and everything she was about to risk. "Yes." Rivera's face went pale with shock and relief. "My God, you can speak. Not much, not for long, dangerous." The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign after years of existing only in her thoughts. But they came easier with each syllable, as if her voice was remembering how to exist in the world. "Cross doesn't know? Cross thinks I died inside. Thinks trauma broke my voice." Bella paused, gathering strength for the longer sentences she needed to say. "He's wrong. I've been watching, waiting, learning." Rivera leaned closer to the window, his eyes intense with the focus of someone recognizing the magnitude of what was happening. "My mother? Maria Rivera. She saved you that night, didn't she?" Bella nodded, feeling tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in 15 years finally breaking free. "She pulled me from the cellar, carried me away. Then Cross came with papers, said he would protect me, but he didn't protect you. He imprisoned you. He needed me silent. I am the only witness to what he did to my family." Bella's voice was growing stronger as she spoke, the words flowing more easily as her throat remembered its purpose. "But I have been documenting everything, all his crimes, all his network." Rivera's expression shifted from sympathy to something closer to amazement. "You've been investigating him for 15 years, surviving him, learning him, building evidence." Bella glanced around the alley to make sure they weren't being observed. "But now you're here, and Cross will kill you. Today, maybe this morning, I can take care of myself. No, Bella's voice carried 15 years of accumulated knowledge about Cross's methods. You don't understand what he is, what he controls. Sheriff Morrison, Judge Whitfield, Marshal Carson, they all take his money. He owns this territory. Rivera absorbed this information with the grim acceptance of someone who had suspected as much but hoped to be wrong. Then what do you suggest? Bella looked directly into his eyes, seeing in them an echo of the woman who had saved her life 15 years ago. Help me destroy him completely, not just stop him. Destroy everything he built. How? I know where he keeps the real records, documents that prove everything, but I need someone who can make it legal, make it matter. Rivera nodded slowly. I can do that, but Bella, if we're going to do this, if we're going to bring down his entire network, you're going to have to be more than a witness. You're going to have to testify publicly, speak in court, face Cross directly. The thought terrified her more than anything she had endured in 15 years of silence. But Bella had not survived Cross's cruelty and built a resistance network just to remain hidden when justice finally became possible. I've been preparing for this moment my entire life, she said quietly. Cross thinks silence made me weak. He's about to learn how wrong he was. Rivera smiled, and in that expression Bella saw not just his mother's features, but also the promise of hope she had carried through years of darkness. What do you need me to do? First, we need to keep you alive. Cross has men watching you already. Tonight, they'll try to make it look like an accident or bandits. How do you know this? Because I've watched him eliminate 17 people over the past 5 years. Same pattern every time. Bella's voice carried the weight of accumulated horror. He never does it himself, always has, plausible denial, always makes it look like someone else's crime. Rivera pulled back from the window slightly, processing the scope of what Bella was telling him. 17 people, men who knew too much, families who wouldn't sell their land, women who could identify him. Bella paused, gathering strength for the most difficult revelation, including your mother's friend, Carmen Vasquez. She helped deliver Apache children. Cross said she was spreading disease. She died of sudden fever last winter. Rivera's face went white. Carmen was like an aunt to me. My mother still doesn't know she's dead. Cross made it look natural, like he does everything. Bella leaned closer to the window. But I have proof. I have samples of what he used. Documentation of how he does it. Jesus Christ. Rivera ran his hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process the magnitude of Cross's crimes. Bella, if what you're telling me is true, we're not just talking about murder and theft. We're talking about systematic genocide. Now you understand why I couldn't just speak up, why I had to wait for the right moment. Cross doesn't just kill people. He destroys entire communities, makes it look like progress. Rivera was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the alley while his mind worked through implications and possibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new quality, the kind of focused determination that suggested he was no longer just investigating old crimes but preparing for war. Where are these documents you mentioned? Hidden in Cross's house, but also scattered throughout the territory. I learned from my father, never put all evidence in one place. Bella pulled a small piece of paper from her dress. This is a map. Locations where I've hidden, copies of everything. Rivera studied the map carefully. This is incredibly detailed. You've been planning this for years. 15 years, Bella corrected. Since the night Cross killed my family, I knew someday someone would come. Someone who could make justice happen. Your mother, Maria, she knew this too. She's been searching for you all these years, building her own case, gathering her own evidence. Rivera folded the map carefully. She's going to cry when she learns you're alive and what you've become. The mention of Maria Rivera sent a wave of longing through Bella that she had to fight to control. For 15 years, she had dreamed of the woman who had saved her life. Had wondered if she was still alive, still searching, still caring about the little girl she had pulled from the darkness. Is she well? She's tough as leather and twice as stubborn. She runs a clinic in Austin now, provides medical care for Mexican families and Apache communities. She never stopped believing you were alive, never stopped looking for evidence that would bring Cross to justice. Bella felt something break loose in her chest, a knot of grief and hope that had been tied too tightly for too long. I want to see her again. You will. But first, we need to make sure we both survive the next 24 hours. Rivera looked directly at her, his expression serious. Bella, if we do this, if we move against Cross directly, there's no going back. He'll know you can speak, know you've been working against him. He'll try to kill you immediately. He's been trying to kill me for 15 years, just slowly, making it look like charity. Bella's voice carried a hardness that surprised even her. I'm tired of dying, by degrees. I want to live, completely. Rivera nodded, understanding passing between them like a current of electricity. Then we do this together. But we do it smart, and we do it fast. Once we start, Cross won't stop until one of us is dead. Good, Bella said, feeling her voice grow stronger with each word. I've been waiting 15 years to have that conversation. They spent the next hour planning, with Bella sharing details about Cross's network and Rivera explaining the legal processes that could turn her evidence into official charges. By the time they finished, they had outlined a strategy that was ambitious, dangerous, and possibly their only chance of surviving what came next. As Bella prepared to leave, Rivera caught her arm gently. Before you go, there's something else you should know about your family. What? Your father's mine. The silver deposits he discovered before he died. Cross has been working them for 15 years, but he never found the main vein. Your father hid the location too well. Bella's heart began to pound. How do you know about the mine? Because your father and my mother were friends. Eduardo shared his engineering plans with her before he died, asked her to keep them safe in case something happened to him. Rivera's expression was intense. Bella, do you know where your father hid the real mine survey? Bella stopped, memory rushing back in waves. Her father's journal, the one she had been decoding for 15 years, the references to the deeper truth and Isabella's inheritance, not metaphors about justice and patience, but literal instructions about buried treasure. I think I do, she whispered, but I never understood, never realized. The mine your father discovered isn't just valuable, Bella. It's worth enough money to reshape the entire territory's economy. And according to territorial law, it belongs to his heirs. Rivera smiled. It belongs to you. The implications hit Bella like a physical blow. Her father hadn't just been killed for his land or his principles. He had been murdered for one of the richest mineral deposits in Texas, and Cross had been robbing her inheritance for 15 years while keeping her prisoner in his own house. Cross knows, she said, understanding flooding through her. That's why he kept me alive. He's been waiting for me to remember where my father hid the real survey. But you never told him. I never knew what I was remembering. My father's journal is full of engineering symbols and Apache signs. I thought they were metaphors. Bella's mind was racing through years of carefully studied pages, seeing them now with new understanding. But they're not metaphors. They're a map. Rivera leaned closer. A map to what? To the biggest silver mine in Texas, and to evidence that will destroy not just Cross, but everyone who's been helping him. Bella's voice carried new certainty, the confidence of someone who finally understood the full scope of what they were fighting for. My father wasn't just an engineer. He was building a case against territorial corruption. The mine was just the beginning. The beginning of what? Bella looked directly at Rivera, seeing in his eyes the same determination that had driven her through 15 years of silence and preparation. The beginning of justice, real justice, the kind that changes everything. As she prepared to return to Cross's house, Bella felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. For 15 years, she had been preparing for this moment without fully understanding what she was preparing for. Now she knew. She wasn't just going to testify against Cross or expose his crimes. She was going to reclaim her family's legacy, restore her father's vision, and use the wealth Cross had stolen to heal the communities he had destroyed. But first, she had to survive long enough to make it happen. Be careful today, she told Rivera as she climbed back through the window. Trust no one in authority. And if you don't hear from me by sunset, you'll contact me. You've survived 15 years of this. You're not going to die when we're this close to winning. Bella nodded. But as she rode back toward Cross's ranch, she carried with her the knowledge that survival was no longer enough. Today, she would either find her voice completely or lose it forever. The choice was no longer Cross's to make, it was hers. The sun hung low in the western sky as Isabella Morales crouched in the secret room behind Cross's study. Her father's real journal spread before her alongside the territorial survey maps Cross thought she had never seen. For the first time in 15 years, she was looking at both documents simultaneously, and the truth they revealed together made her sick with understanding. Her father hadn't just discovered silver. He had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that reached from territorial officials to Washington politicians, all centered around the systematic theft of mineral rights from Mexican and Apache families throughout South Texas. Eduardo Morales had been building a legal case that would have exposed the entire network if Cross hadn't killed him first. But Eduardo had been too careful to put all his evidence in one place. The journal contained references to documents hidden throughout the territory, each cache marked with symbols that combined his engineering notations with Apache landmarks only Isabella would recognize. Cross had been sitting on top of the largest silver deposit in Texas for 15 years, but the location of the mother lode remained locked in symbols only his victim could decode. Bella traced her finger across a particular sequence of markings, her memory finally connecting childhood adventures with her father to the sophisticated treasure map he had created. The main vein wasn't on Cross's property at all. It was buried beneath land that still belonged to the Apache, protected by treaties Cross couldn't legally break but could circumvent through murder and intimidation. No wonder he had kept her alive. She wasn't just a witness to his crimes, she was the key to completing the largest theft in territorial history. The sound of approaching horses made Bella quickly conceal the documents and retreat to her kitchen duties. Through the window, she could see Cross returning with 3 other riders, their horses lathered with sweat, and their faces grim with the kind of focused purpose that usually preceded violence. Bella recognized 2 of the men, Sheriff Morrison and Judge Whitfield, the corrupt officials who had helped legitimize Cross's various land seizures over the years. The third man was younger, wearing the kind of expensive suit that suggested connections to territorial or federal authority. As they dismounted, Bella could hear fragments of their urgent conversation. "Rivera's asking too many questions. Can't just disappear a lawyer from Austin. Needs to look like Apache raiders." Cross was finalizing his plan to eliminate Rivera, but something had changed. The timeline had accelerated, and the method had become more complex. Whatever Rivera had done during the day, it had forced Cross to improvise. Bella retreated to her position near the kitchen fireplace, where she could hear the conversation in Cross's study without being detected. As the 4 men settled with whiskey and cigars, their voices carried clearly through the shared chimney. "The problem," Judge Whitfield was saying, "is that Rivera isn't just asking questions randomly. He's got specific information about specific crimes. Someone's been feeding him intelligence." "Who?" Cross's voice carried deadly calm. "That's what we need to find out. But whoever it is knows details that were never part of any official record. Details about how we handled the Morales situation, about the mine surveys, about the territorial land grants." Bella's blood went cold. They weren't just planning to kill Rivera. They were planning to torture him first, to find out who had been helping him. And once they learned about her involvement, they would come for her next. "There's another problem," Sheriff Morrison added. "Rivera sent telegrams to Austin this afternoon, to the Territorial Attorney General's office, and to someone at the Federal Marshal Service. If he disappears now, there's going to be a full investigation." Cross was quiet for a long moment, and Bella could imagine him working through the implications of a federal investigation that couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Then we don't make him disappear," Cross said finally. "We discredit him. Make him look like a fraud who came here under false pretenses." "How?" "Simple. We prove he's not who he claims to be. We prove he's actually a wanted criminal using a false identity to avoid prosecution elsewhere." Bella pressed closer to the fireplace, understanding the terrible elegance of Cross's new plan. He was going to frame Rivera for crimes committed by someone else, then kill him while resisting arrest. It would eliminate the threat while making Cross look like a hero who had exposed a dangerous fugitive. "What crimes?" Judge Whitfield asked. "Bank robbery in Colorado. Murder of a federal marshal in New Mexico. The kind of charges that justify shooting first and asking questions later." Cross's voice carried satisfaction at his own cleverness. "Morrison, you'll receive an anonymous tip tonight about Rivera's real identity. Whitfield, you'll sign the warrant based on Morrison's evidence. And Davis here will make sure the federal authorities receive confirmation that their fugitive has been located and eliminated." The third man, Davis, spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the educated accent of someone comfortable in government circles. "What about the investigation Rivera started? His telegrams to Austin? Simple miscommunication. A false alarm about territorial corruption that was resolved when the real criminal was identified and eliminated. Austin will be satisfied that justice was served." Bella felt the trap closing around Rivera and herself simultaneously. Cross had created a perfect frame that would eliminate Rivera while reinforcing his own reputation as a defender of law and order. By tomorrow night, Thomas Rivera would be dead, and Isabella Morales would be back to being a silent witness to injustice, unless she acted first. Bella retreated from the fireplace and climbed to her attic sanctuary, where she pulled out the most dangerous weapon in her arsenal. A complete list of every corrupt official, every bought judge, every federal marshal who had taken Cross's money over the past 15 years. She had been saving this information for the moment when she could use it to bring down the entire network, but Rivera's imminent death forced her hand. She also retrieved the samples of poison Cross had used to kill Carmen Vasquez and Maria Rivera, evidence that could prove premeditated murder if analyzed by someone with the right knowledge. And finally, she took her father's real journal and the territorial maps, the documents that could expose the true scope of the conspiracy Cross had been hiding. As darkness fell over the ranch, Bella prepared to do something she had never attempted in 15 years of careful invisibility: leave Cross's property without permission and travel alone through territory controlled by his allies. She would have to reach Rivera before Cross's plan could be implemented, and she would have to do it without alerting the network of watchers Cross had positioned throughout San Miguel. But first, she had one more task to complete. Bella made her way to Cross's study, where she knew he kept his most incriminating correspondence in a hidden safe behind his collection of law books. She had watched him access this safe hundreds of times over the years, had memorized the combination through careful observation of his hand movements. The safe contained everything she had hoped for and more: records of payments to corrupt officials, detailed plans for eliminating inconvenient witnesses, and most damning of all, a complete confession Cross had written but never sent to his mysterious superior in Washington. Bella photographed each document with the small camera she had acquired through her underground network, then carefully returned everything to its original position. Cross would never know his most dangerous secrets had been copied until it was too late to matter. As she prepared to leave the house, Bella paused in the kitchen where she had spent 15 years serving the man who had destroyed her family. Tomorrow, this room would be a crime scene as federal marshals searched for evidence of Cross's activities. The silent Mexican girl who had cleaned these floors and prepared these meals would be revealed as the architect of the most comprehensive exposure of territorial corruption in Texas history. But tonight, she was still invisible, still underestimated, still carrying the element of surprise that could mean the difference between justice and continued oppression. Bella slipped out of the house and made her way to the stable where Cross's horses waited in their stalls. She chose the fastest mare, a black filly Cross had trained for speed rather than endurance, and led her quietly away from the buildings before mounting and spurring towards San Miguel. The ride through the darkness was treacherous, but Bella had memorized every path, every creek crossing, every shortcut that could save precious minutes. As she rode, she rehearsed the words she would need to say to Rivera, the evidence she would need to present, the legal arguments that could turn her documentation into official charges. For 15 years, she had been preparing to speak. Tonight, her voice would finally be heard. But as she crested the hill overlooking San Miguel, Bella saw lights burning in unusual patterns throughout the town. Too many people moving too late at night. Too much activity for a quiet territorial settlement that usually slept after dark. Cross's plan was already in motion. Bella urged her horse faster, racing against time and corruption and 15 years of accumulated injustice. Below her, the town of San Miguel waited like a chessboard where the final moves were being played, and she was the piece that could checkmate the king or die trying. As she rode toward whatever waited in the darkness ahead, Bella touched her throat where her voice lived, finally ready to speak the words that would either free her or destroy her completely. The silence was about to end, and when it did, the entire territory would hear the truth that had been hidden for 15 years behind the quiet obedience of a supposedly broken girl who had turned out to be the most dangerous enemy Cross could have imagined. Isabella Morales was no longer silent, and she was no longer afraid. The reckoning had begun. Bella reached the outskirts of San Miguel as the church bell tolled midnight, its bronze voice carrying across the sleeping town like a warning of judgment to come. She dismounted in the alley behind Rivera's hotel and studied the building carefully, her enhanced senses picking up details that would escape casual observation. Two men sat in the shadows across the street, their positioning too deliberate to be accidental. Another figure moved along the roofline of the building next to the hotel, probably positioning himself to cover Rivera's window. Cross's network was already in place, waiting for the signal to implement their manufactured arrest and convenient killing. But they were watching for threats approaching Rivera from the outside. They weren't expecting danger to come from the silent Mexican girl who had spent 15 years learning to move through their world like a ghost. Bella made her way to the hotel's rear entrance, where the kitchen staff received deliveries during the day. The door was locked, but she had learned to pick simple mechanisms during her years of secret activities. Within minutes, she was inside the building, moving through corridors lit only by the dim glow of oil lamps turned low for the night. Rivera's room was on the second floor, and Bella could see light under his door as she approached. He was awake, probably reviewing his evidence or preparing for whatever confrontation he sensed was coming. She tapped softly on the door, using the same pattern she had used at his window that morning. "Rivera, it's Isabella. Open the door." Quietly. She heard movement inside the room, then the soft sound of the lock being turned. Rivera appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour, his face tense with concern. "Bella, what are you doing here? How did you—" "They're coming for you. Tonight, within the hour." Bella pushed past him into the room, her voice urgent but controlled. "Cross has framed you for crimes you didn't commit. Bank robbery, murder of a federal marshal. Sheriff Morrison has a warrant, and they plan to kill you while resisting arrest." Rivera's face went pale, but he didn't waste time with questions or protests. "How do you know this?" "I heard them planning it. In Cross's study, Morrison, Judge Whitfield, and a federal contact named Davis. They're turning you into a scapegoat to cover their own crimes." Rivera moved to his window and peered through the curtains, immediately spotting the watchers Bella had observed. "Jesus, they're already in position. We have perhaps 30 minutes before they move, maybe less." Bella pulled the documents from her dress, spreading them across Rivera's bed. "But I have evidence that will destroy all of them. Not just Cross, but his entire network." Rivera stared at the papers covering his bed. Photographs of incriminating correspondence, samples of poison in labeled vials, maps showing the locations of hidden evidence caches throughout the territory. "My God, Bella, this is everything. 15 years of documentation, every crime, every payment, every murder." Bella's voice carried quiet satisfaction at Rivera's amazement. "But it won't matter if we're dead. We need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it immediately. The Territorial Attorney General. I sent him a telegram this afternoon, told him to expect additional evidence by tomorrow." Rivera began gathering the documents carefully. "If we can get this to him tonight, how? Every road out of town is watched. Cross owns the sheriff, the telegraph operator, half the businessmen in San Miguel. Bella moved to the window, studying the positioning of Cross's men. We're trapped. Rivera was quiet for a moment, thinking through possibilities. Not necessarily. There's someone in town who might help us. Someone Cross doesn't own because he's not part of the territorial system. Who? Father Miguel Santos, the priest. His church is considered sanctuary under territorial law, and he has connections to the Catholic hierarchy that reach all the way to Austin and beyond. Bella felt hope stir in her chest. She knew Father Miguel had observed him during years of secret activities. The old priest was one of the few people in San Miguel who seemed immune to Cross's influence, probably because his loyalty belonged to a higher authority than territorial politics. The church is 3 blocks away. But getting there without being seen, I know a way, Bella said, her mind working through the network of alleys and hidden passages she had mapped over the years. But we'll have to leave everything except the most crucial evidence. Too much to carry will slow us down. Rivera selected the most damaging documents: the photographs of Cross's confession, the poison samples, the maps showing evidence locations. This should be enough to start a full federal investigation. As they prepared to leave, Bella caught Rivera's arm. There's something else you need to know. About the mine, about why Cross kept me alive all these years. What? He doesn't just want the silver for wealth. He needs it to fund a larger operation. Something involving federal officials, territorial expansion, systematic elimination of Mexican and Apache communities throughout the Southwest. Bella's voice carried the weight of terrible understanding. The mine isn't just valuable, it's the foundation for genocide. Rivera stared at her, processing the implications. How large an operation? Large enough to reshape the entire region's demographics. Large enough to eliminate anyone who might object to territorial policies. Bella moved toward the door, her voice urgent. That's why we have to survive. We're not just exposing corruption, we're preventing mass murder. They left Rivera's room through the window, using the fire escape that connected to the alley behind the hotel. Bella led the way through a maze of back streets and hidden passages, her knowledge of San Miguel's geography allowing them to move unseen while Cross's watchers maintained their positions around the hotel's front entrance. The Church of San Miguel Archangel stood on a small hill overlooking the town, its stone walls and bell tower silhouetted against the star-filled sky. As they approached, Bella could see light in the sacristy window, suggesting that Father Miguel was awake despite the late hour. They reached the church's side door without encountering any of Cross's men, and Rivera knocked softly on the heavy wooden panels. After a moment they heard footsteps approaching, and Father Miguel's voice called out in Spanish. "Who seeks sanctuary at this hour?" "Friends of truth, Father," Rivera replied in the same language. "We need your help to prevent great evil." The door opened to reveal Father Miguel Santos, a man in his 70s whose weathered face spoke of decades ministering to communities caught between cultures and legal systems. His dark eyes studied Rivera and Bella with the penetrating gaze of someone accustomed to discerning truth from deception. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice carrying surprise and concern. "Child, what brings you here in the darkness, and why do I hear your voice after so many years of silence?" "Because the time for silence is over, Father," Bella replied, stepping into the church's sanctuary. "And because you are the only person in San Miguel who cannot be bought or intimidated by Nathaniel Cross." Father Miguel's expression hardened at the mention of Cross's name. What has that man done now? Rivera and Bella spent the next hour explaining everything. Cross's crimes, the conspiracy reaching to federal levels, the immediate threat to Rivera's life, and the evidence that could expose the entire network. Father Miguel listened without interruption, his face growing more grave with each revelation. "I have suspected much of this for years," he said finally. Cross's wealth could not be explained by legitimate ranching. The families that disappeared, the convenient accidents, the way territorial officials always ruled in his favor despite obvious corruption. The priest shook his head sadly. "But suspicion is not proof, and proof without power is merely an invitation to martyrdom." "We have proof now, Father," Bella said, showing him the documents. "And Rivera has connections to federal authorities who cannot be bought." Father Miguel examined the evidence carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement to horror as he realized the scope of what they had uncovered. This is monstrous. Cross has not simply committed crimes. He has created a system of oppression that rivals the worst excesses of the Inquisition. The priest looked up at Bella with new respect. Child, you have accomplished something extraordinary. You have turned suffering into justice, silence into the most powerful testimony imaginable. But only if we can get this evidence to Austin, Rivera said. Cross's men are watching every road, every telegraph line. He plans to kill me tonight and claim I was a wanted fugitive. Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment, considering their options. Retry JN, continue, edit. Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment, considering their options. Then his weathered face brightened with the kind of smile that suggested divine inspiration meeting practical cunning. There is a way, he said quietly, but it requires faith in methods older than territorial law or federal authority. He led them to the back of the church, where a small door opened onto a staircase, descending into darkness. The Spanish missionaries who built this church were not naive about the dangers they faced. They created alternative methods of communication. The stairs led to a network of tunnels that had been carved from the living rock beneath San Miguel, connecting the church to several other buildings in town and extending into the countryside beyond. Father Miguel lit an oil lamp and guided them through passages that had been hidden for over a century. The Apache knew of these tunnels long before the Spanish arrived, Father Miguel explained as they walked. Sacred caves that connected their ceremonial sites. The missionaries adapted them for their own purposes. Where do they lead? Rivera asked. Everywhere that matters. To the old mission at Santa Rosa, 20 miles south, to the Apache sacred sites in the Canyon country. And most importantly for our purposes, Father Miguel paused at a junction where 3 tunnels met, to the ranger station at Del Rio, where Captain Harrison maintains the only telegraph line in the territory that Cross doesn't control. Bella felt a surge of hope mixed with amazement. These tunnels have been here all along, hidden in plain sight, child. Sometimes the best secrets are the ones people assume cannot exist. Father Miguel handed Rivera the lamp. Captain Harrison is an honest man, one of the few in territorial law enforcement who cannot be bought. If you can reach him with your evidence, he can get word to Austin faster than any of Cross's people can interfere. How long to reach Del Rio through the tunnels? 6 hours on foot. You would arrive just after dawn when Harrison begins his daily telegraph communications with Austin. Rivera looked at Bella, seeing in her face the same determination that had sustained her through 15 years of waiting. Are you ready for a 6-hour walk through underground tunnels? I've been ready for 15 years, Bella replied. But father, what about you? Cross will suspect you helped us when he discovers we escaped. Father Miguel smiled with the serene confidence of someone whose ultimate authority transcended territorial politics. Cross may suspect, but he cannot prove, and even if he could, the priest shrugged, some things are worth the risk, child. Justice is one of them. As they prepared to enter the tunnels that would carry them toward safety and justice, Father Miguel pressed a small silver cross into Bella's hand. This belonged to your mother, Isabella. Maria Rivera asked me to keep it safe until you were ready to claim your true identity. Bella stared at the cross through tears that had been waiting 15 years to fall. Her mother's cross, proof that she had not been forgotten, that someone had been keeping faith with her memory even during the darkest years of silence. How your mother and Maria Rivera were sisters, child. Not by blood, but by choice. When Carmen died that night, Maria promised to watch over you always. She has been doing so, even when you didn't know it. The final revelation hit Bella like physical force. Maria Rivera was not just the woman who had saved her life. She was family, chosen family who had never stopped caring about the little girl pulled from the wreckage of that terrible night. She's been watching over me all these years, through the network you thought you were building yourself. Through the medicine and money that appeared when families needed help most. through the warnings that kept communities safe from Cross's violence. Father Miguel's eyes twinkled with ancient wisdom. Did you think a 7-year-old girl, no matter how clever, could create such a sophisticated resistance network entirely alone? Bella laughed through her tears, understanding at last why her secret activities had been so much more successful than she had dared to hope. She hadn't been fighting Cross's network with her own resources. She had been the visible agent of a shadow organization that had been preparing for this moment since the night her family died. She's still alive, Rivera said softly. My mother is still alive, and she's been protecting you through proxies and intermediaries for 15 years. And now, Father Miguel said, it is time for the student to meet the teacher, for the daughter to embrace the mother who never abandoned her, for the silence to become a voice that will be heard throughout the territory and beyond. They entered the tunnels, carrying evidence that would expose corruption reaching to the highest levels of government. They walked through darkness toward a dawn that would finally bring light to 15 years of hidden crimes. And they moved forward with the knowledge that they were not alone, that they had never been alone, that justice delayed could indeed become justice prepared when the right moment finally arrived. As they disappeared into the ancient passages beneath San Miguel, Cross's men continued their vigil around the hotel, waiting for a target who was already beyond their reach. By the time Cross realized his carefully planned trap had failed, Rivera and Bella would be in Del Rio, their evidence in the hands of Captain Harrison, and telegrams would be racing toward Austin, carrying the documentation needed to bring down the most extensive criminal conspiracy in territorial history. The tunnels that had once carried Spanish missionaries fleeing Apache raids now carried the evidence that would destroy the network of corruption and violence that had poisoned South Texas for a generation. History had come full circle, and justice was finally ready to be served. 6 hours later, as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, Captain Harrison of the Texas Rangers received the most important visitors of his career. A young lawyer from Austin and a Mexican woman whose voice carried 15 years of accumulated truth were about to change everything. The silence was over. The reckoning had begun, and Nathaniel Cross was about to discover that the broken girl he had kept as a trophy had actually been the weapon of his own destruction, patiently gathering strength for the moment when one voice could finally speak loudly enough to be heard above the noise of corruption and bring the justice that had been delayed but never denied. Isabella Morales had found her voice, and when she spoke, the entire territory would listen. The dawn that broke over Del Rio on that morning in 1887 was the dawn of a new era for South Texas. An era where the victims of systematic oppression would finally have their day in court, where the networks of corruption would be exposed and dismantled, and where a young woman's 15 years of patient preparation would prove that sometimes the greatest weapon against injustice is the courage to speak truth when the moment is finally right. As Captain Harrison began composing the telegrams that would summon federal marshals from Austin and beyond, Bella stood at the window of the ranger station, watching the sun rise over the Texas landscape she was about to help transform. In her hand, she held her mother's silver cross and her father's mining journal. In her heart, she carried 15 years of accumulated strength and wisdom, and in her voice, finally, completely, unbreakably, she carried the power to change everything. The girl who had been silenced by trauma was about to become the woman whose testimony would echo through history. The victim of Nathaniel Cross's cruelty was about to become the architect of his complete destruction, and the secret network that had protected the oppressed was about to step into the light and claim the justice they had earned through years of patient resistance. Isabella Morales had waited 15 years to speak. When she finally testified in court 3 months later, her voice was strong enough to topple an empire of corruption and wise enough to build something better in its place. The silence that had once screamed with unspoken pain had finally become the voice that sang with the promise of justice served, communities restored, and a future where no child would have to endure what Isabella Morales had survived. The reckoning was complete, the truth had won, and the silver mine that had cost so many lives would finally be used to heal the communities it had been meant to destroy. In the end, Eduardo Morales's dream of justice had been fulfilled by the daughter he had taught to be strong, to be patient, and to never forget that sometimes the greatest victories come to those who know how to wait for exactly the right moment to speak the words that change everything. Isabella Morales had spoken, and the world had listened.